Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Adeline's Horror World. My name is Adeline, but of course, you guys already know that. I apologize for the lights being out in this review. The batteries in them are dying, and I will have to get new ones later on down the line. So be expecting this for a little while. I know it's a bland background. I'm sorry, but once I get new batteries, it'll go back to being colorful as it was. So anyways, welcome to 2026, everyone. I hope 2025 was a pretty good year for you guys and that you were able to get through it safe and sound. And I hope that this year treats you well as well, obviously, and that it's wonderful for all of you. So anyways, back to the horror. And today's film is a standalone horror film. No sequels or remakes, just an adaptation of sorts. Misery. We're reviewing Misery. So without further ado, let's get started. So Misery stars James Caan, Kathy Bates, Richard Farnsworth, Frances Sternhagen, and is directed by the late Rob Reiner. As most horror fans already know at this point, this movie is an adaptation of the 1987 novel by the one and only Stephen King, and to this day it is known as one of the most famous adaptations for his and one of the most critically acclaimed. And for a very good reason. Famous Victorian romance author Paul Sheldon has just finished a new book that exists outside of his usual Misery novels. However, after celebrating and attempting to leave Silver Creek, Colorado to go back to New York, a dangerous blizzard leads to him crashing his car. Fortunately, or unfortunately, a nearby nurse named Annie Wilkes, who also claims to be Paul's #1 fan, rescues him from the crash and begins to care for him in her home. This takes place right as Paul's final Misery novel, Misery's Child, is published. As the days go by and he starts to recover, Annie discovers that Misery Chastain dies at the end of the final book. And Annie is not who she seems, as she dissolves into a violent rage. And Paul's situation has just become a lot more life-threatening. He must play by her rules in order to stay alive, and that includes being forced to write a new Misery novel, Misery's Return. So as I stated before, most horror fans already know that this film is a Stephen King adaptation. And whenever a horror movie is coming out that has his name attached to it, it can go one of two ways. It can either be a spectacular film that simultaneously adapts the source material correctly and is also good in terms of quality, or it could be an absolute disaster that is completely incoherent and illogical. And especially after King directed Maximum Overdrive, I'd be pretty scared for an adaptation of his too. No, I'm not reviewing that movie, piss off! All jokes aside, there isn't really too much to discuss when it comes to the production side of things about this film. It's pretty straightforward. Andrew Scheinman, I apologize if I pronounced that name incorrectly, read the book on an airplane and recommended it to director Rob Reiner, who was his partner at Castle Rock Entertainment. Eventually, William Goldman, who would go on to write 2 additional Stephen King adaptations, Hearts in Atlantis and Dreamcatcher, would be hired to write the screenplay. Production went underway in February of 1990, primarily in Nevada, and while not much is known about the filming process, as I said already, I will be pointing out some key differences that are from the novel, the most particular of which being the hobbling scene.
Hey, please!
In the movie, we obviously see Annie using a sledgehammer to violently break Paul's ankles when he's caught sneaking out of his room. However, in the novel, it's far darker and gorier than what we see on screen. Instead, Annie uses an axe to sever one of his feet before using a propane torch to cauterize it. Not long after, when he's complaining about his typewriter having a missing end key, Annie uses an electric knife to cut his thumb off in a fit of rage. Yikes! Also, the characters of Buster and Marcia, who I adore so much, are completely absent in the novel, replaced by more random police officers. Though the officer in the book gets a much worse fate than Buster. In the book, the officer is stabbed multiple times with a crucifix before getting his head run over by a fucking lawnmower. Jesus Christ, Annie! Finally, the ending of the novel was originally meant to be far darker than what we get, which is pretty much an identical ending to the movie. Since it was supposed to be a Richard Bachman novel, King's pseudonym, the ending was going to have Annie feeding a dead Paul to her pig Misery. But since he had been found out as Bachman, King decided to make it a traditional novel with a far lighter ending. Misery was finally released on November 30th of 1990, right around when the TV miniseries of It was airing on ABC. Don't worry, I will eventually review all of the It movies, including the newest show, Welcome to Derry, probably sometime next year. Upon release, the movie almost immediately got critical acclaim, with most critics praising the tension, the performances, and the pacing. Even some of the comedy lauded a lot of praise from critics. Stephen King himself highly praised the movie, even putting it in his top 10 favorite adaptations. Because of her performance as Annie Wilkes, Kathy Bates received an Academy Award for Best Actress the following year, marking this as the only Stephen King adaptation to ever win an Oscar. Yep, not Shawshank Redemption, not The Green Mile, but Misery. Rotten Tomatoes currently has Misery at 91%, and the critics' consensus goes as follows. Elevated by standout performances from James Caan and Kathy Bates, this taut and frightening film is one of the best Stephen King adaptations to date. And now for my favorite section of these reviews. Adeline's Horror World Trivia Time! Did you know, and this is an amusing one, that Rob Reiner cited this film as one of the earliest examples of making the audience think that the villain is dead before popping back into frame with one last scare? Well, that's not true entirely, as it's happened in previous horror films in the past, such as Carrie and a majority of the earlier Friday the 13th films. Finally, did you also know that when Kathy Bates won her Oscar for the film and went on stage to accept her award, there was one thing that stood out in her acceptance speech that makes it one of the funniest acceptance speeches ever. When she got her award, what she said was,
"I would like to thank Jimmy Caan and apologize publicly for the ankles."
Before I move on to the rest of the review, I do want to take a minute out of this video to talk about Rob Reiner, who alongside his wife Michelle was tragically killed back in December of last year. Now, I am ashamed to admit that besides this movie, I haven't really seen any other of Rob Reiner's work, though I do heavily wish to do so one day. I have Stand By Me and The Princess Bride on my bucket list of movies to watch. I know I need to watch those movies before I die, so please don't attack me because I haven't watched them yet. I will watch them someday. But despite the fact that I've only seen Misery out of his entire filmography, I cannot deny that he did make a very big impact on all of cinema and the art of filmmaking, with a lot of the most famous directors from nowadays listing him as an inspiration. His death was a very sad loss, and we lost him way too soon. And I do hope that his family is getting through this tragedy. And with every bit of sincerity that I have, rest in peace to you and your wife, Rob. So although I didn't get to watch this film until my late teens, I was heavily familiar with the impact that Misery had on both the horror genre and pop culture as a whole. I was aware of the characters of Annie Wilkes and Paul Sheldon, and I did know that this movie was lauded as one of King's most iconic adaptations. I have read the novel myself, and I can conclude it is a pretty good story. I did rewatch this movie for this review, that way I could refresh myself on the overall quality, and I can safely say that this film is just as terrific as I remember. Spoiler alert ahead of time, but this is my favorite King adaptation by far, and I even prefer it to the novel in a number of ways. So let's delve into why. So first, I have to talk about the pacing of the film, which is expertly done. This might be one of the best paced horror films that I've ever seen. Sure, it is nearly 2 hours long, but there really isn't a moment that feels slow or unearned, even in the scenes where there isn't any suspense to be found. The pacing is tight and precise, and none of the scenes feel out of place at all, even the more comedic bits with Buster and Marcia. The screenplay by William Goldman does help to elevate this, as he could have easily put in an unnecessary or boring scene that could have slowed the pace down. But he cared about making a slow burn, suspenseful film that also doesn't feel like it's being dragged out just for the sake of plotting, and honestly, it's pretty much perfect in my eyes. Next, and possibly one of the biggest positives I've ever given to any film I've seen in my entire life. Kathy fucking Bates. You know me on this channel by now. I care a lot about good acting performances. And if a performance is magnificent, then I have to hold myself back from going on a 5-minute tangent about it because of how good it is. But Kathy Bates' performance in this film is perhaps the greatest acting performance I have seen on screen in my entire life. Every single moment with her is fucking brilliant, down to the last frame. And she does a good job on fooling you on multiple occasions. At the very beginning of the film, Annie seems genuinely kind and just wants to help Paul, right? Wrong, because even though she does crack less than 30 minutes in, the build up to this is profound, and it is paced perfectly, even though it happens really early. And then it just all culminates after that in an intense and genuinely petrifying performance that constantly has me on edge when watching it. Even on every rewatch that I've ever had, she still manages to terrify me. She deserved that damn Oscar win.
There! Look there! See what you made me do!
You dirty bird. How could you?
I don't want her, bitch! I want her! And you murdered her! You did it! You did it! You did it! You did it! You murdered my misery!
And don't even think about anybody coming for you. Not the doctors, not your agent, not your family. And you better hope nothing happens to me, because if I die, you die. Is this what you're looking for? That would be like junking a Mercedes just because it had a broken spring. No, if they caught them, they had to make sure they could go on working, but they also had to make sure they could never run away. The operation was called hobbling.
No, not misery! Not my misery! No, not my misery!
Next, I have to give the late James Caan his flowers as well. His performance is actually on par with Bates, and he makes Paul a lot more likable than he is in the book, in my opinion. Now, that could be because it's been quite a number of years since I've read this book, and I've only read it once, so maybe upon reread, I could potentially change my mind about that. But in the book, he was kind of more of an asshole. He was, I don't know, he just kind of had that vibe in the book. Now, it could have been because this was 80s cocaine king writing this, but I don't know. Paul just seems a lot more likable in the movie because you can really feel the pain that he is going through. His performance is just as intense as Kathy's, but it's also a lot more harrowing. In the moments where he's forced to hurt his legs even further in order to get out of his wheelchair or out of his bed, you can really feel his pain, and it feels almost too real at times. It's one of the most realistic depictions of a character surviving something so physically traumatic like that car accident. And I have to commend him and Rob Reiner for getting this across to the audience in a pretty accurate way. And although I do prefer Kathy's performance, I will briefly give James a bit more credit for having one of the greatest line deliveries that I have ever seen or heard on film.
You want it? You want it? Eat it! Eat it to yourself, you sick, twisted fuck!
Next, I always forget just how tense this movie really is. There are multiple moments where I'm on the edge of my seat because I'm either afraid of Paul getting caught or because Annie's switches from good to evil are so unpredictable that I almost go crazy, just like Paul does for being so on edge. There's a specific moment about halfway through the movie where he sneaks out of his room for the first time, and then he has to desperately wheel back to his room before Annie gets back from the store, or else she will catch him. And it is one of the most suspenseful scenes I've ever seen. Even the jump scares are really effective, such as this one. Right up to the very end, the movie is spine-chilling and nerve-wracking, to the point that I feel like I'm barely able to breathe until the credits even start rolling. And that rarely ever happens when I watch a horror film. Next, the comedic moments are surprisingly heartfelt and fitting for this film, as they offer rare glimpses of levity into the story. The scenes between Buster and Marcia are simultaneously the most charming and most adorable moments that I've seen in any movie like this.
Virginia, when you're in this car, you're not my wife, you're my deputy.
Well, this deputy'd rather be home under the covers with the sheriff. Need some help?
No, I'm enjoying myself. Thank you.
Just leave it, all right? Oh, I like that tone.
It helps that Buster is actually a good example of a good police officer in a horror movie, where he actively pays more attention to the more minor details that other officers would hardly notice, such as the dents in Paul's car, and the quote from one of Paul's books that winds up being a quote that Annie says in the newspaper when she is initially arrested for murdering those infants in the hospital she works at. Very, very well done. I have to commend Rob Reiner for that. And finally, the third act of this film is one of the most intense third acts that I've ever seen in a horror film, and that's for one key reason. Paul Sheldon is so likable that you don't really want him to die. And that's unexpected for a character like this, who is a rich and famous author. And a lot of rich and famous characters can ultimately turn out to be pricks. But not here. Paul is very intelligent, he's very resourceful, and he's very charming thanks to James Caan's really likable performance. So honestly, if Paul had died at the very end of the movie, I would have been really heartbroken, so I'm really glad that he ends up surviving. The fight between him and Annie is brutal and raw in a very good way, and it ultimately makes her death really satisfying to watch. Fuck that crazy bitch. So overall, guys, no mixed elements or negatives to be found here because, frankly, I found absolutely nothing wrong with the film. Misery is one of my all-time favorite horror films, and it's my favorite Stephen King adaptation to date. Now, sure, it may not be the most entertaining Stephen King adaptation like it is, and it's not even the most accurate to the source material, but this is the most suspenseful, the scariest, and the best directed adaptation of all of them, in my honest opinion. The performances by Kathy Bates and James Caan are sensational. The writing is splendid, the suspense is strong, and the pacing is tight and perfect all the way through. This may be the highest recommendation that I have given to this channel in a long time, as this is an elite horror film that should be remembered in the genre forever. Please watch this film if you have not already, as it is a required viewing not just for horror, but for cinema altogether. I'm going to give Misery the most obvious grade that it should receive, an A+. So, what do you guys think of Misery? Do you like this movie? Do you hate this movie? God forbid. Do you love this movie? Or is it just in the middle for you? Let me know, we could discuss it in the comments below. Also, go ahead and let me know if you prefer the novel by Stephen King or if you prefer the 1990 movie. So anyways, be looking forward to my next review, which will be the beginning of another horror franchise that we're covering. And it's actually a franchise that I have rarely ever discussed on this channel. Bonus points if you can actually guess it correctly. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and switch your notification settings to all. That way you can be notified for all future videos and content here on the channel. So anyway, guys, I guess that's pretty much it. So anyways, I'm Adeline. This is Adeline's Horror World, of course. You guys already know that. I love all you guys to death. And until next time,